day at the airport devolved into a chaotic showdown that could potentially end his career. Witnesses described the scene as resembling a reality TV meltdown, complete with flying bags, screaming voices, and a moment when it appeared as though Jim Jones had thrown everything away. Industry insiders are already discussing it. The whispers aren't looking good, promoters are retreating, sponsors are ceasing to speak, and fans are split. Social media is ablaze, with some proclaiming this the end of the world and others supporting Jim Jones. However, the real question is how it all began. Did Jim Jones start the altercation, or was he set up for failure? More importantly, has this one incident totally destroyed his career? Stay tuned because you're about to hear Jim Jones appeared confident as he walked through the airport in his trademark swagger, wearing a designer tracksuit, with heavy chains around his neck and glasses resting low on his nose. It was just another day, another flight, another city, and he had places to be, deals to make, and money to stack. The flashing cameras and the fans' whispers that recognized him didn't faze him. He was accustomed to it, but something felt strange. Jim ignored it at first, thinking it might be nothing or that he was simply exhausted, but then a voice from across the terminal cut through the airport like a blade, making him think that he could just go about his day like that. Jim's steps slowed, his brow furrowed slightly behind his shades, and he turned his head just enough to see who had spoken. Jim's heart rate remained constant as a man with a mean-looking jaw clenched tight stood a few feet away from him. He was accustomed to confrontations and people trying to push him in public, but this time it was different. The man approached him, his hands balling into fists, and people noticed a murmur go through the crowd. Hamas began rolling. Something was about to go down, Jim said coolly, his voice steady, but that was the wrong response. The man lunged quickly and aggressively before Jim could react, sending him stumbling backward, his foot catching on a metal divider, almost sending him to the ground, his sunglasses going flying, skinning across the floor, and his mind racing. Jim adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and exhaled slowly. When a young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, the woman clutched her purse and stepped back in shock. People froze, but Jim wasn't the type to back down. He caught himself before he fell, and his stance and face darkened. His voice was low-controlled, but anyone who knew Jim Jones knew that tone meant war. The man smirked and cracked his knuckles, saying that he wanted this, that he had planned for this, and that he was looking for a fight. That dropped his duffel bag on the floor game, and immediately after the first punch barely missed Jim's face, instinct took over. He had been in fights before, and he had thrown hands in worse places than an airport, but this wasn't just any fight, it was a spectacle, with cameras recording every move, every punch, and every word. Jim knew that he had two options: fight back and risk everything, or leave and appear weak. Jim's pride made the decision for him. The man grunted, but instead of backing down, he lunged again, grabbing at Jim's collar and trying to pull him forward. Jim fought back, and the entire airport was filled with TSA officers shouting that the fight was messy, brutal, and devoid of stag nonsense. The man threw another punch, but Jim blocked it, and a second later, they were locked in. A fight broke out as they gripped each other's shirts and strained their muscles, and then the man slammed Jim against a metal railing. The sound reverberated throughout the terminal, and everyone's mouths were screaming. Someone knocked over a luggage cart, and a baby began to cry. It was pure madness. Jim gritted his teeth, because this guy wasn't just there to fight, he wanted to humiliate him, but that wasn't going to happen. Jim twisted, breaking. The man stumbled and was freed from the grip, but security tackled them both hard at that very moment. Jim hit the ground hard, his face pressed against the cold airport floor, his knee in his back, his handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and the other man struggled while shouting into the cameras. He wiped the blood that trickled from his lip with the back of his hand and grinned. Jim Jones felt the cold bite of the airport floor against his cheek as the weight of the security guard pressed down on his back, his muscles tensed, adrenaline still flowing through his veins. He wasn't finished fighting, by a long shot, but now it wasn't his opponent he had to deal with, it was the law. Jim growled, twisting. Flashed, it was over, or so Jim thought, because what happened next would turn this from a viral fight into the biggest scandal of his career. The other guy, who started the whole mess, was on the ground too, but he wasn't resisting. Instead, he was smirking, and that's when it hit Jim. The entire confrontation, the fight, the way the cameras were aimed at him before the first punch was delivered, everything was set up because someone wanted to see Jim Jones fall, and as security yanked him to his feet and shoved him forward, the voices of the Jim's mind raced as he was dragged through the airport, wondering why his label was an industry rival, someone seeking influence, or something more significant than that. Was this about something from his past finally catching up with him? The crowd confirmed his worst fears. Damn, Jim really out here wildin', ain't no way he coming back from this, bro, just threw away his whole career. Jim clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain silent so they wouldn't see him crack, but his mind was racing because he knew the real fight was just getting started back at the station inside the airport. Jim's head snapped toward his so-called opponent, who was now being escorted by another officer. Their eyes locked, and then the man winked. That was all Jim needed to see that Jim's cuffed leg was still bouncing impatiently as the police discussed charges of assault and disturbing the public order. The words were like bullets, each one striking harder than the last. Jim could already see the headlines: Jim Jones Air RTE after violent airport crawl, Gene Jones career in jet party after brutal attack, and then the worst one, the one he knew was coming, Jim Jones, another rapper who was unable to leave the streets. He exhaled sharply in an attempt to "What the hell were you thinking?" Jim scoffed, leaning back in his chair, and said, "You really think I started this?" Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. This was exactly what they wanted, and his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a noon's attitude, stormed into the room. Vanessa Carter was the best.